Hello, welcome. Ow! I'm excited you're here. I'm excited you're here. Thanks, Garrett. Hey, what's your name? Melvin. Melvin, I'm glad you're here. It's gonna be a lot of fun. This is a great series, the Extracurricular. It is community content. All of these sessions were organized by the community, selected by the community, dry runs, polishes, conversations. Everything that was put together for the Extracurricular was done by people in the community. And it's really interesting content. It's also a format that's different than you're used to. So let me walk you through it. These are pretty long format. We're gonna be in here for about 2 hours. And you don't have to stay the whole time if you don't want to, it's totally fine. But what this is a chance to have the kind of interesting conversations you have in the hallway at a conference like this. You bump into someone that's like you, they have similar interests, similar abilities, and you have these interesting conversations about your life and the types of projects that you see in the real world, and you talk about them and you learn things. You learn things from your peers. And we've tried to take that idea of that hallway conversation and turn it into a session you can come and attend as an audience member. It's sort of weird, but we think the format works pretty well. What's gonna happen here is our main speaker is gonna present an idea, a complex topic, a project they've been involved in, and they're gonna sort of set us up for a conversation. And the bulk of this session, the real purpose of this session, is the Q&A that we're gonna have about that topic. So our speaker is gonna walk us through an idea, and then we're gonna spend about 45 minutes to an hour breaking down that idea, asking questions about it, answering questions about it, talking about it, just sort of taking this complex thing and teasing it apart and trying to figure out what it looks like. And this is a chance to learn stuff at a very advanced level. These are not simple talks. They are technical material, they are advanced content, and they're for people that really want to learn at a higher level, right? It's not stuff you're gonna find on Trailhead. This is not stuff you can read on a blog. This is stuff that you learn from people that have done it before. So I hope you really enjoy it. At the beginning here, we're gonna have a little bonus section, which is that we have these 2 quick talks. A quick talk is just a 5-minute talk about something cool, and we're not gonna ask that person any questions. We don't wanna scare them. We're just gonna let them show us something cool and then move on. So we're gonna do 2 quick talks at the start here, and then we'll get into our main session, and that'll last for about 75 minutes. So it's a lot of fun. Hope you enjoy the format. This is the second of 7 of these that we're having at TDX. We're going all day today, all day tomorrow. So if you like the format, come on back. We've got a lot of great sessions. Oh, my name's Chuck Liddell, forgot to say that. I'm one of the co-organizers. I really want to thank my other organizers that helped put this together, and I'm really pumped for this. So let's get started. Our first quick talk is Miranda Ragland, and I put away my intro slide. Yeah. All right, Miranda is the founder of M7 Unlimited, a registered Salesforce ISV partner. She is a 3X certified Salesforce professional with 13 years of experience in the ecosystem, former co-founder of 2 prior companies, as well as a user group leader. When not behind the keyboard designing and implementing solutions, Miranda is a movie and pop culture aficionado, an LGBT rights activist, and she enjoys spending time with her 3 children, playing outdoors, assisting with STEM projects, as well as building Lego kits. Take it away, Miranda.
All right. Hi, I'm Miranda Ragland. As Chuck said, I'm the founder of M7 Unlimited. We put apps on the App Exchange and also do Salesforce development consulting. I'm here to talk to you about a project that I led a year ago for a client that wanted to replace, or not replace, they wanted to update their sales milestone creation process. Now, during discovery, after reviewing how they implemented it, we found 4 different triggers with hundreds of lines of conditionals, all following a simple pattern. Did a value change? Did it match a specific value? Did an optional secondary value change? And if so, create a milestone. This was across 4 different triggers, 4 different objects, and it didn't have a shared code base. This was literally hundreds of lines of code. And I took one look at it and thought to myself, this looks like a maintenance nightmare that I am never going to I'm never going to stop updating this for this client. I need a better way to do this. So what we did is we created a simple decision engine based on custom metadata and dynamic apex. So let's start drilling into that. By using custom metadata, we were able to take advantage of the ability to have metadata relationships for both the objects and the fields to model those data points. And so what object did it occur on? What field got updated? And did it get set to a specific value? Is there a secondary field and a secondary value? If so, create a milestone with some simple data properties. And we'll have it modeled in this simple record. It looks like any S object that you would have been working with throughout your entire Salesforce career. And because it's custom metadata, it does have this ability to have these metadata relationships. So I can directly link to these fields. If we change a field name, it gets updated. The code doesn't break. Okay. Now if we look at the code, we're essentially doing the same thing. We're first determining what object are we working with. We query the metadata definitions, and then we iterate over the records that have changed, as well as those metadata relationships. Did a field change to a specific value? Did an optional secondary field change to a value? And if so, create a milestone. Now, the actual specifics of that are hidden in a couple of methods. So we determine our object name. We just take a look at one of the values that changed, use the power of Apex to figure out what type it is, and return that. We query the metadata definitions that I previously showed. It looks like any SQL query that you would do. Determine if the value changed. Did the value match? And if so, create a record. Doing it like this, we were able to save hundreds of lines of code. An admin can modify and update the process without contracting a developer. It's deployable between orgs, which is one of the major selling points of custom metadata. And and the client was utterly happy with this. We extended it to 3 additional objects with absolutely no trouble whatsoever. This is a simplified version of what I delivered because I can't show their IP, but these triggers are simple. All we had to do is add an additional lookup and a couple of lines of code, and it all worked. Thank you very much.
Next up, we have Jay Janarthanan. Jay has over 20 years of software development experience as a hands-on CTO, architect, senior developer, mentor, and trainer. For the past 7 years, Jay has been concentrating on Salesforce, MuleSoft, and Marketing Cloud. He continues to work as a C# developer since year 2000. Before that, Jay was a Java programmer, starting with Java at Sun when Java was still an internal product at Sun Microsystems.
Okay, before I start, my mom is 82 years old, and every time I speak at a conference, she says I make up things. So let's do a picture. Bad, thanks. How many of you are developed or have passed in the developed other than Apex? Good. So quickly, Apex Sharp is a project I started basically to convert Apex code into C# and C# code into Apex. Now, why do you want to do that? Well, let's start with an example. Here's a C# code for a controller And as you can see, we have the same select statements. You can have the system debug, everything. Okay, so basically it's a Visual Studio plugin based on the Salesforce tooling API. Okay, so here's the Salesforce, C# code. Here's the test class. Okay, so why do you want to write, code in C# and then convert to Apex? Well, a couple of things, right? Let me run this test. So we all know how fast unit test runs on our orgs. Here, the unit test is actually running on your local box. So if you have a faster machine, it runs at that speed. Okay. How about debugging? So let's say I want to see, get all contacts. Let's put a debug statement somewhere. So, you get a breakpoint, you see the values, and what's happening in the behind the scenes is, I'm actually going and getting the data from Salesforce. So, instead of putting system debug all over, you can do debug, right? So you got the code, this is a very simplified example. You got the test class, all is working, okay? So what do you do next? You can convert this to Apex. So what I'm going to do is just run the program, the converter, and the converter converts. And you can see this is my favorite IDE, Illuminated Cloud, and you can see the code converted to Apex. Okay. Now, interesting thing is you can convert back, to C#. Let's say you're working with another developer who's made and goes and makes changes into it. I don't know. I'm just going to make some stupid changes here. Which one I convert? Oh, I know. So let me make this change. That's the only class I'm converting. See the code, the converted code is back, right? So all it does is, there's a couple of things in this, what you're seeing. One is the transpiler. So, you heard about probably Typescript, closure script, a lot of those things that converts between two languages. Here, basically, I take Apex code, convert to C# and take C# code back to Apex. Okay, that's one thing. Secondly, the runtime environment, that's the Visual Studio plugin. Okay, so every time you run a SQL code or SOQL code, I'm actually going to your Salesforce sandbox, pulling the record. When you insert, it's inserting. So you get to develop, in C# and take advantage of, obviously the local compiles, local debugging. I mean, I'm not supporting every single Salesforce API. So where it fits really is, I work on a project which is about 300,000 lines of Apex code. And right now I'm partly refactoring a lot of these things where taking out the business logic, for example, mortgage calculations, which is very complex. You pass a bunch of parameters into it, a method, and the method does the magic and, spill out the results, right? But the method is very complex, so, you have to debug, you have to, unit test, things like that. So ideally, this type of development is suited when, you're working with data, you're working with complex algorithms, things like that, where you need the help of faster unit testing and local debugging. And the project is called Apex Shop, and it's on GitHub, and go and play with it. Cool.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Miranda. Hope you guys enjoyed those little quick talks, just 5 minutes about something cool you've worked on. We like this format a lot. It's a good chance for people that have never been on stage before to talk, or somebody that knows their stuff to talk. A chance to share something cool. All right, we're going to get into our main session now. I'd like to introduce our group that's going to be in front of you for the next bit. Our speaker is Anthony Hubert, and the talk is, can you put your org in source control? Yes, with an asterisk. I don't know if you saw the asterisk in the title, but it's there. Check again. And we're going to spend a lot of time on that asterisk today. So Anthony is a developer and architect working with Salesforce since 2010. His current focus is building amazing experiences using Salesforce and communities. As a user group leader and co-organizer of Utah's Snowforce, he enjoys engaging with others and always has a conceptual problem he'll want you to think through with him. I do that to you too. If he isn't doing something with Salesforce, he can usually be found with his wonderful wife and 3 young kids. Our moderator for today's session is Marissa Hamilton. Come on down. And Marissa has been building on the Salesforce platform since 2009. Her career in technology and software spans over 20 years. She is CTO at BidTrackSell, a newly minted Salesforce MVP, community leader and entrepreneur, geek, wife, mama, and grandma who believes in living life with drive, passion, and service. All right. Our first panelist, Jody Miners. Jody is from Melbourne, Australia, is the director of a Salesforce partner, the Detail Department, and is a Salesforce MVP and Salesforce Certified Application Architect. And our final panelist today is Sebastian Wagner. Sebastian is a CTA since 2014. He's been working on Salesforce projects across the globe since API 12. Wow. As the founder of Flow Republic, he has made it his mission to coach and enable others to become CTAs too. Whether he's not busy on projects or coaching, he goes underwater to enter his happy place. All right. So once again, the format here is going to be Anthony kind of teeing up a conversation that we're all going to participate in. So he's going to spend about 20 minutes just sort of laying the groundwork for this interesting problem that he's been trying to solve and has partially or mostly solved. And then we'll do some Q&A from the panelists, some Q&A from the audience. Feel free to add color commentary, share your experiences. And we'll be kind of just jumping around, kind of hopping on the mics, passing mics around. It's very informal. And Marissa's in charge. So I leave it in her very capable hands. All right, off you go, Anthony.
All right. Thank you all for coming. I'm very excited for both of our 2 panelists that came before me and grateful for them. Real quick. Yeah. You know why that's so wonderful? Because they both took at least 5 minutes that I don't have to talk. All right. We're going to dig in here. I want to tell you a little bit about where we're coming from, what got us started. I work for a company called doTERRA International. They are an essential oils company. Maybe you've heard of them, maybe you haven't. If you ever use their Deep Blue Rub, it's one of our most popular products. Really nice, soothing stuff. But they're a company that's all about trying to help the world, trying to make it a better place. They've got a lot of good stuff in their mission that really attracted me to them. What else attracted me to them as a company was they had this amazing vision for what they wanted to do with Salesforce. They had this idea that they wanted to take Salesforce and build a lot of what to most of us amounts to a bunch of partner communities. They wanted to build a lot of really rich, fully custom interfaces for doing Salesforce. But they wanted people to get these customized views of the world, things that were built just to help them and just to make their lives better, to make managing their businesses and managing their partnerships easier, and to track all of their relationship with our company. So when I got there, doTERRA had built out the beginnings of some of this. And we got there, and a lot of stuff was happening in sandboxes. A lot of stuff was happening in production. Who uses sandboxes to do their development? There's a lot of people. Are you here because you don't want to do that anymore? Okay, good. You're in the right place. Okay, and that's what we were doing. There was a lot of sandboxes. My first day on the job, I got introduced to our sandbox, where we were doing a lot of our coding. And the first thing we ran into was, what if I was changing something that the other guy was changing? And suddenly I blew away a reasonable portion of his work effort for the day. Oops. We decided we're going to do something different. I'd just come out of the consulting world, and I really regretted not being able to more often implement source code tracking and to do things through Git and to do things through a managed, auditable, trackable way. So we decided that we were going to make things different here. Salesforce had really just taken DX, their Salesforce DX and Scratch orgs out of beta, and we decided we were going to go down that route. And we started modeling what our requirements looked like. For this to work, our development environment had to look like production. It had to function like production, hit a lot of the same considerations and concerns. We had to have products fighting against each other like they do in production. Anyone had triggers that fire other triggers that fire back, and oops, now you're out of limits. We had to be able to model all of that. We had to be able to capture all of that. We had to be able to let people develop and not, we had to let people develop in the world that this would actually run, and not develop in isolation and then throw it over the wall to find out that there was something they didn't consider, there was something they didn't know about. And so that's what we've set out to do. And as we walk through, we're going to talk about what it means to put all this together, how we've had to build up some support and tooling to enable this, and what it's meant for our business, what it's meant for our org to be able to go through life in this manner. Okay. For those of you that are developers, you're probably nodding your head with, yes, source control, Git, managed systems, this is great. For those of you that are admins, you're going, I don't know any of these words. At least that's what it was for my admins. I think we scared them real bad when we talked to them about this. We had a mix of different admins. One admin was really strong he worked with metadata, he understood metadata configuration files, and he loved Ant. Ant was his favorite tool. He's going to watch this later and hit me, I'm sure, because I'm selling him out. I won't tell you his name, though. So he loved Ant. Ant was the best tool ever. And it's great. It did exactly what he wanted to do. They could work on something here, they could send these package files through, and he knew exactly what he was sending into the org and what would happen. And he had all his configurations built, and Ant worked well for him. And we told him we were going to take it away. Bad day. Our other admin didn't do any of these things. He'd come from a sandboxes and change sets kind of world. And he was just eager for not doing that anymore. So we presented our plan, we sold it to him, or just told him it was happening anyway. And we started putting this together. And we talked to him about Scratch orgs and DX and all of its beauty. And you know what? Our admins took it really well. Once they got into it, they said, this is great. All of our stuff is managed in source control. But you know what really got him? Git. Git was hard. Git was hard for a lot of people. That is one of the first takeaways from this is it makes sense for people for Scratch orgs. They've worked with sandboxes a lot. They've worked with all of these things. But at least for us, our team really struggled getting on board with Git, understanding what was on their machine, what was in their Scratch org, what was in source control. There were so many places and locations, and especially as we were introducing SFDX and Git at the same time, they really started conflating those two principles. And it was, okay, so I've got this other branch, but which branch is in my Scratch org? Well, none of your branches are in Scratch org. It's whatever branch you have out is the code on your machine, is the code that you push to DX, is the, never mind. We just did a lot of hand-holding. It helped. But that is something to be prepared for, is as you start bringing in admins and people who haven't done source control in their past, and even some developers that have only developed on Salesforce, that's going to be a point of learning, a point of growth. It's worth it. All right, so let's dig in. The first thing we'll talk about is what it means for us to spin up a new Scratch org. All of our development happens in Scratch orgs. Anyone that tries to develop in sandboxes gets things taken away and hand-slapped. Because this is part of our fundamental strategy is you work in Scratch orgs and no one sees any of your code, no one knows what you did until you send it into, we use GitLab, until you send it into our GitLab server for a merge request. Otherwise, people are not going to look at it. People are not going to work on it. It doesn't exist until it makes it to our source control. Well, who has a complicated org? Yeah, I don't know that we have enough hands up. That's only like a quarter of the room. We didn't think we had a complicated org. Our org is pretty young, comparably. Our org is about 2 years old. We have a lot of custom code in it. We're coming up on about 300 custom Aura components, a couple dozen custom Lightning components, various custom objects and things. When we do a full metadata push to our org, it's coming up on about 5,000 components once we put everything together. And that's custom fields, custom objects, custom everythings. But it amounts to a lot. We didn't think it was complicated. We thought we got this early enough when the org was young enough that it would be really easy to cut over. I've got one of my other developers in the room. His name's Alex. When he started, I handed him this project and said, your first thing when you come to this company is you're going to put the rest of our stuff in source control. I'd done about half of it, and I thought he had about half of it. I was wrong. He forgave me, I think. It was a lot of work. I think his first 2 months was just spent pulling down metadata from our production org, combing through it, sifting through it, mutilating it, manipulating it, turning it upside down and inside out, and then fixing whatever bugs he found along the way, and getting this into source control. Along that path, we found that because our org was so complicated, and it's still not the most complicated thing out there, we had to start having scripts and automation and tooling. Ultimately, we built our project around it's built kind of like a Node.js project in terms of we've got a lot of tooling and a lot of automation that we have to do, and that's all written in JavaScript. Mac developers in the room? Well, Mac users in the room? Okay. Windows users in the room? Yeah, we have a mix. And so anything we did had to work across multiple platforms. It had to work across multiple OSs. So we couldn't do bash scripts. We couldn't do Windows command scripts. We couldn't do PowerShell scripts. Because at best, we would have to do things twice. I hate doing things twice. So we threw it all out and just went with JavaScript. Luckily, JavaScript is pretty pervasive. There's packages for just about everything, and a lot of tooling is built there. We'll talk a little bit about some of those benefits. We had a lot of things we had to do. So this is the script that builds a Scratch org for us. And I'll just kind of walk down it real quick, and I'll give you a high level. The first thing we do is we pull in some modules. And this is a bunch of pre-built configuration, things that exist in NPM if you've ever done any node development. And we pull all this together. We can manage our system with configuration values. We use environment variables a lot in these stages. So if one developer or one admin wants to have their Scratch orgs last for 30 days, they can do that if they want to have, without changing our scripts. That's important. Please don't go rewrite this code. I've worked hard on it. But we're able to go and customize different things with environment variables. We're able to say, here's how long I want my Scratch org to last. Here's what I want my Scratch org to be named, what alias I want to give it. All kinds of configuration values, and this just understands it. As we go through, we start getting into our configuration for everything. We start saying, okay, go get me a new Scratch org. This runs really fast. In terms of a couple minutes. Once we get that Scratch org, well, then we have to install Lightning testing service into it. And once we get Lightning testing service, then we actually have to pre-push some metadata. There is various metadata in Salesforce that when you push it at the same time as other metadata, one of them murders the other one. It's like it never happened. And you go, what? No, I definitely pushed that in. I gave it this config. And so we give some of those a head start. We push them in a little bit early. For instance, our knowledge settings, turning on knowledge along with some of its configuration. We have to feed that to the org before we bring in everything else, otherwise it disappears. We've got some community things that we have to bring in ahead of all of this. So once we do that, we do all of our one-off deployment here. Then we have some anonymous Apex. A lot of our tooling and a lot of our stuff, a lot of our JavaScript is running either DX commands directly, or it's running anonymous Apex via DX commands. That's how we're doing most of this. We're running a lot of the source push. We're running some source deploy. We use all the DX. So once we have all that put together, Then we run down here and we say, oh, go ahead and push all of our source code except a few things. Again, not all source can go in together. And when you're standing up a Scratch org from what amounts to a brand new developer edition, it really struggles for a few things. In this case, we've got Live Agent installed in our org. Anyone use Live Agent with Omnichannel? I'm sorry. Salesforce's metadata API for the Live Agent chat buttons will not let you set up omnichannel routing. Doesn't work. You can set up normal Live Agent routing all day long, but their metadata, anyone here work for Salesforce and can change that? No hands? Worth a try. Okay. So as we get into this Live Agent routing, we say, oh, dang it. So we chop off anything, we chop off those Live Agent buttons, we chop off anything that has to have it to live, and we push everything else into the org. This is where we do our first big source push. It takes about 15 minutes, between 10 and 15 minutes to run. Again, we're talking about between 4,000 and 5,000 components, little individual things that have to get put in and layered on and put together. And then we can come in and we actually have a browser automation, and I'm going to run that real quick, and I hope it goes well. And this uses a tool called Puppeteer. And Puppeteer is coming out of the Chrome team. It allows us to automate and script Chrome, very similar to Selenium or any of those other tools. I saw a Provar guy here. There you go. It goes and runs the browser for me. The first thing it does is create that pesky chat button, set it up the way I want it. Look, Ma, no hands. The second thing it does is it goes over to the sites and it turns on Guest API for one of our communities. I want to talk about that for just a minute. Anyone here know what the Guest API is? All right, I got a couple hands. There's some. Yeah, okay. The Guest API does a couple things. I only care about it for one thing right now, and that is data categories. A couple of our custom sites, and look, my Chrome browser's gone. It just took care of all that for me. Our Guest API is used to go get data categories from our system. More importantly, it's used to get translations for data categories. I cannot find any way anywhere in Apex to get translations for data categories if it's not the language that my user is set to. And you're like, well, why in the world would you want to get translations for a user that's not, or for a language for a user that's someone else other than who's running the Apex code? Guest users, anonymous, unauthenticated users, if they want to change the language in the community, Salesforce takes care of all the custom label magic and gives them all those translations the way it ought to. But if you want to use data categories anywhere, you better just go make a different app. Or you can use the support API. So in our Apex code, we dial out back into our Salesforce org via the community's public URL, and we go get all the data categories in whatever language we want to display them in. And that's one of the things that our automation here enables for us. And that's another one of our gotchas. We were going through this and trying to figure this out. We went the rounds with Salesforce support, and none of us could find a way to make this work. We finally found the support API. It does a couple other cool things. You can go get different knowledge articles and things for it, but being able to get translations was what we really wanted out of it. But once we figured that out, it was how do we put that into our org? How do we put that into our Scratch orgs? Because again, going back to our requirements, is the Scratch org has to look and function like production. It has to work. And if we can't push that setting in our metadata config, which that's another checkbox that doesn't exist in your metadata API, then we've got other options. We know what we can do for it. All right, so that's what happens here. We start going forward. All those things that we didn't deploy earlier, we come back and we can deploy them now. We give perm sets. Now we start getting into, we run some other metadata. Again, a lot of different phases of metadata. Then we start setting up our org. So now our org has all the configuration. It has all the perm sets, it has all the objects, it has all the Apex, it has all of our normal configuration data. The next thing we need is start getting our user set up. There was no way to get our user set up before this because I couldn't give him perm sets that didn't exist. I couldn't give him roles that didn't exist. I couldn't do all these things for our users. I couldn't create our community users for profiles that didn't exist. And that's what happens here. We start finishing setting up our user. We create community users for testing. We also start seeding our data. We start building our sample data for the org. And I'm just looking at my time thinking, yeah, maybe I got to go a little faster. So we start looking at all of our data. I love the tree API. Anyone familiar with the tree API? I know there's a few. Yeah? Good. This is an amazing API for seeding data. You can send a JSON sample of what your S objects are directly into Salesforce. Better, you can send in relationships. Here's all the descendant data that's hanging off of this. Knowledge articles with data category assignments. You can send in accounts and contacts. The tree API will automatically stitch things together with reference IDs. It's really wonderful for seeding data. Part of our source control, part of the code that we have in our system is all of our sample data. So we know when you spin up a Scratch org, you're always going to have a user named Johnny by the way. You're always going to have exactly the same set of people you expect to be there. You're always going to have the same data you expect to be there. We do a lot with knowledge articles. We found it's really hard to seed knowledge articles into your org. You can put them in there, but then you've got a couple problems. One, they're not published. There's no way over in a single API call to submit and publish a knowledge article. The other one we ran into was translations. Knowledge articles have this weird slice off a part of me and call it a translation. It's still the same knowledge article, but it's a different knowledge article version with its own properties. And we can't seed that data in either. So we ended up taking a little bit more creative solution to that. And we push in a lot of knowledge articles. We also push translations next to them. So they're actually completely different knowledge articles. And then we have in the URL name, we formatted it. That's useful. We formatted this knowledge article so we can go and find these translations. And then in our anonymous apex right here, we start stitching everything back together. We say, okay, grab all of the English articles and find anything that's not English and use the URL names to kind of map things back together. Oh, I'm the ES version of that. I'm the JP version of that. And what happens is it ends up pulling these all out of the database, deleting those records, creating them as translations, and then publishing the whole lot of them. This was something that, I don't know, we had to spend a few days on it. But it was something that, again, we had to be able to test our code. We had to be able to see how things behaved. We have to have certain functionality and whatever we have to do to get it. All right, so we start seeding all of our data. We start putting things together. We've got JSONs everywhere. We use the bulk API for a couple things as we want to set up some additional relationships between things, because we've got account objects that reference each other or reference up or sideways or do different things. And one of the things that you can't do with the tree API is have these objects that are being inserted at the exact same time reference each other. And so we then come back with a bulk API job and stitch everything back together with external IDs. So again, it's lots of steps, it's lots of little pieces, but at the end of the day, it takes about 30 minutes, a little less depending, to get everything set up and get everything built. And so we tell a lot of the people working in our org, about once a week, sometimes a couple times a day, you're going to take 30 minutes and you're going to make a new Scratch org. Hopefully it doesn't break, hopefully we don't have problems, hopefully everything's good, and then you can work in that for however long you want and develop. It'll behave like production. You can pull in stuff from our source control, updates that the other developers have made and push them right in. It tracks really well. And we end up with these Scratch orgs that are all ready to develop in that looks exactly like production, mostly, and it's ready to go. I say mostly because we actually have some things that are not, they're either not tracked in source control or are just different in source control. There are a couple things that you can't push into a Scratch org, or the version you hold in your Scratch org, if you pushed it to production, would start trashing production. A couple examples of that are, if you think of your community, and you were in your community on a custom domain. For us, it's things like help.doterra.com. When we're running those custom domains, those domains are part of the site config. There's no way for me in my Scratch org to tell every single Scratch org, you're available at help.doterra.com. And so we just don't tell our Scratch orgs about our custom domains. But that also means that I can't send my site config to production because suddenly that site in production would not have a domain on it anymore. Oops. We caught that one first. We didn't send that one out. But there are a few things like that. Email to case. there's a case settings object inside the settings stuff. Our email to case routing address is something that is unique to production. When you clone a sandbox, it gets a different routing address, but it's also defined inside of your case settings object. We can't have any email to case set up in our Scratch orgs, because as soon as I put an address in there, I'm either going to trash the thing in production or I'm just going to get rid of it altogether, and then we would have no email to case at all. Now, I don't love having cases open by email, but I do like being able to respond to cases by email. And we don't want to lose that. We ran into a really fun problem when we started pulling all of our stuff into source control. We had a nice little auto formatter that made things look pretty. Wasn't prettier, I think. And it took care of all of our code and got it formatted the way that we wanted to be consistent. It also took care of some of our XML files. One of those XML files is a translations file. And it said, this formatter said, everywhere I see a comment, let me stick some spaces to the left of it. Salesforce didn't like that. When you sent spaces, an empty space into your translations, it freaked out. So we're getting ready to deploy. We've got all of our source code in. This is a couple months worth of work. We've pulled everything together. We've checked it all. It looks good. We send it to a sandbox to make sure that everything's functioning. We pull up our community. Okay, English looks good. Let's switch over to Spanish. Oh, there's nothing here. The whole community is gone. The page is there. It's white. There are no components. There are no events. And we're just, oh, no. It took a couple days. We had to dig through it. And this is just another one of those gotchas. Don't put spaces in your translations for your custom labels, because Salesforce's server just falls over. It's getting its Aura components ready to load. It's swapping custom label values out and says, I know what to do here. But as soon as it finds a blank value, it just says, nope, I'm out. And doesn't send you any useful error messages. So we ended up just sending little bits of our configuration and our metadata into the org, trying to figure out which one thing it was that broke it. We finally figured it out, and we aggressively deleted spaces and turned off formatting. But again, these are just the little things. It is a really big deal to extract an entire org and start managing it in source control. But it's incredibly beneficial. One of the other things we have is automation CI jobs that run. When you're managing all of your source code, when you're using your Salesforce push and pull to automatically track your changes, eventually that's got to make it to production. What does that look like for us? So this is where we get into that Git. We're crossing over from the DX side into the Git side. And so you're grabbing and you're taking all of your changes, you're packaging them up in your source format, and then you're going over to whatever your Git client is, be it command line or visual interface. You know, if you're using the stuff that's built into your IDE, and you're saying, okay, here's all the changes I want. I'm going to send those up to our Git server. Again, I said we use GitLab. And so I make a branch, I move all my stuff into it, I send them up. And in our configuration, we've got some automatic jobs that run. We've got stylistic checkers, we've got static analyzers. We use PMD to do Apex static analysis, and we can enforce rules. Things like don't use see all data. Anyone use see all data? Don't raise your hand. There are a couple reasons for it, and we do have ways of having it when we need it. But we're able to define what our rules are. We're able to define our policies. We're able to say, this is what's important to us. You know, don't do DML in loops. We can check and analyze and make sure that things are safe and reasonably secure. These tools are never guaranteed, but they help a lot. We also use ESLint to check some of our JavaScript to make sure it's formatted correctly. We've actually switched all of our Aura components over to use Typescript, and we've done a lot of tooling to be able to have things like autocomplete on what property names are available, what controller attributes are available. When I run this controller method, which parameters can I send into it, and to make sure those are of the correct type and formatted the right way, and that the return value I get out of those is the correct and a sane return value. We've put a lot of work into this. We have, like I said, we have hundreds of Aura components, and we found that just maintaining those, trying to remember what I did yesterday, was really hard. And so we tried to make our IDEs smarter and our code checkers smarter. All right. Once we get all of that, we've done all the checking. I broke it. Okay. Once we've done all of that, we've done all the static checking, we've made sure the code is good, then you can send me a merge request and you can say, dear Anthony, please, 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 I want to make this change. And I can read through it and I can see exactly what you're trying to change in production. I can see exactly what pick list values you've added, which custom objects you've added, how you've changed our Apex code. It's not just a guess. It's not, well, I went through and recorded this in my Excel sheet so I knew what to build the change set out of later. We can see exactly what changes you're making to your system, to our system. We all own this. It's all of our heads on the line. And we can have people come in and review it. Code review is a wonderful thing. It helps us catch things that are, oh, we haven't thought about this edge case, or that's not going to perform well, or that's a really great idea. I'm going to start using that pattern in everything I do because I love it so much. And we have all of the wonderful benefits of collaboratively writing code and reviewing code, but we also know exactly what production looks like. We've got a special branch in our source repository that is the code in production. If you want to get something in production, you've got to go through this other merge request, hey, dear Anthony, please accept my changes, and then we deploy. We do not have automatic deploys to production. We're working on it. We want to get there. We just don't have enough automated tests in place, and we're working on solving that too. We're a little bit afraid of what would happen if, as soon as I accepted this into master, it suddenly showed up in production. We want to get there again. But we do have the ability to say, okay, everything comes into master, it's flowing in constantly. Master is constantly being pushed to our UAT environment, which is our full sandbox. And so if you want to see what all of our accepted changes look like, you go into our UAT environment. Once you're in that UAT environment, you can test and play, make sure everything looks good. Then we slice a branch off and we say, okay, this is what I want production to look like now. This is the changes I want to apply to production. And we can pull the whole team together and say, okay, everyone has to come in and say yes on this. It's not just me making this decision. And I'll go hound people. And so finally we get it approved and we say, okay, this looks good, merge it. So our delta from all these changes flowing in, getting it into production and deployed, I can do it in about 3 clicks. Not counting however much time I have to spend going and walking up to people's desks and saying, I need you to look at this and just put your name on it. You ever try to trick someone into signing their name? So once you've all looked at it, you've all agreed, we just say, yep, and all of our automated processes take care of all of the deploy to production. One of the things that we do have is it automatically runs a validation job against production to say, yeah, if you deployed this to production today, it would all apply to the org correctly, all the unit tests would run correctly. We can't do a whole lot of automated testing past that ahead of the change because it's not actually applied to the org yet. But at least we have that much confidence, and we've got a whole pipeline of, we've automatically spun up Scratch orgs and run them through all of our Lightning testing service, all of our Apex unit tests. We've checked all the configuration works, everything comes together, we've pushed it into a sandbox to make sure the sandbox works. So by the time we're pushing to production, we've run several stages of make sure this doesn't break anything that we're testing. And that's a big caveat, because you can't test everything, and you always find out the things you're not testing, right? Oh, it broke like that, dang it. All right, and that is putting your whole org in source control.
So does everyone have a lot of questions for Anthony? I have a lot of questions for Anthony, and I've heard this talk a couple of times. Do you have any first, over in the gray jacket? If you could come up to the microphone. Yes, yes. So anybody that has questions, come on up.
Yeah, if you want to talk to me, you have to do it with one of these talking sticks right here. That's the rule.
In your build process here, you're running just inline JavaScript. Have you considered using a JS build tool like Gulp or Grunt?
We looked at it. We kind of ended up at we didn't want to take on the complexity at the time. This was a much simpler version to go.
Okay.
We've talked about using Webpack
Or Webpack.
at some point in the future,
Right.
but we haven't made that change.
Okay. And just one more question. You accept merge requests into master, and master ends up in production. Is that right?
Master's our development edge.
Okay.
And then we do another branch and merge request into a production branch.
Okay. Anybody who has access to the Git repo, though, could theoretically push to master, right?
They can
Oh, but
send
that's
merge
the
requests
development
to
edge,
master.
so that's the intention.
Yes.
Okay.
And that way, so anyone, and we limit, there's only 3 people that can actually accept a merge request into master. And so and we don't allow anyone, even myself, to push directly into our master branch. So we've got that blocked off. So you can only get to master through a merge request, and there are only 3 people that can actually say, yes, this goes in.
Okay. Last one. Do you guys use Jenkins or Travis or any other automation tools to conceivably automate production builds beyond that?
Yeah, so GitLab has their own automated job runner, GitLab CI, and that's what we use.
Oh, okay.
So we're running everything in there. We do have a custom Docker image that we run on that's built very similar to the Encino Docker image, if you're familiar with that.
Okay. Thank you.
So when you first time set up your source, how did you pull your request, basically all the metadata from your production org, using package.xml, using VS Code?
Yeah, so we had,
The question on.
yep. So the question is, when we were first setting up our source control, or we were first pulling everything out of the org, how did we do it? We use DX to pull everything down, but anyone that's used DX to pull out of a production org, it has to have a list of things to go get. So we actually have a package XML that has more or less every single metadata item in our org. And it's just a whole bunch of asterisks, whatever that is, with the exception of our custom objects, because we have to list all the standard objects. And so we've got all the standard objects that are enabled in our org, along with the wildcard to get everything else. And so it just goes on and on and on and on and on, several hundred lines of, and all of those, and all of those, and all of those.
Did you run into any limit issue when you're trying to pull first time?
No, and again, we're not crossing over the, 10,000 records, or 40 megs compressed, or 400 megs uncompressed, whatever those limits are, we're not crossing over those in our org. Okay. And certainly not when we pulled everything out, which was about 3,000 metadata items ago.
Okay.
We didn't have that problem.
All right.
I'll start with some questions then. What managed packages are you using in your org?
Yeah, we only have one, well, we're using 2 for different reasons. In our production org, we only have one managed package, and that's Marketing Cloud. We don't actually install Marketing Cloud into our Scratch orgs. I didn't want to give it the 5 minutes, which creates some interesting things, because there's now fields and objects that don't exist in our Scratch org. We don't have a lot of stuff in Salesforce that cares about that. Outside of the scope of that managed package. So it hasn't been a problem yet. But we may have to start adding that in. The other package we use is Lightning Testing Service, and we install that just into our Scratch orgs, where we can run all of our automated Aura and Lightning Web Components.
So for the tens of thousands of orgs out there that rely on managed packages as a basis for their org, like Commerce Cloud or Financial Services Cloud, or even simple really DLRS as a managed package. Do you believe that this solution that you've created can work with managed packages?
Yes, with one caveat. When I first started looking at Scratch orgs, we were using a managed package product that has since changed their ways, but we couldn't install it because I couldn't get the password for it. Mm-hmm. So as long as you have the ability to install that yourself, you can do that. And we're doing that inside of our script when we install Lightning Testing Service. And you can do that with any of the rest of these.
But then the managed package requires a lot of seed data or, a lot of custom metadata. Of course, we can just use custom metadata API for the custom metadata, but the seed data, again, you're going to run into all those problems where you've got this dependencies of data. So is that then just changing your script? Which is another question. Is it trial and error where you get that order of the script where you're having to do this little bit, then do this, then do this? Is there anything more scientific than trial and error to get that order in your script file?
Yeah, a lot of the managed packages will install and then don't need the configuration data until later. So most of the time, you can put everything into the org and then come back and apply the configuration data later. One thing I will mention with that is you're going to have that same problem with your development environments. When you clone those down, if they use S-objects for configuration and control, you're already used to bringing in whatever your baseline configurations is. That would behave the exact same as here. You just may have to make sure I have to get this data in before I can put this managed package in. But most of the time, you can put all the managed packages in and then come back for data.
Okay, excellent. It's then on. So first of all, I love this. I'm working in an organization where it takes 30 days to set up a sandbox. This is No joke. I think general question, do you intend to actually open source the materials that you've created?
Yeah, so that's one of the things we're working on right now. We're finishing up some stuff. We've got some custom plugins for DX as well as for ESLint that we're cleaning up and getting ready. We do plan to open source this. We'll actually be open sourcing it under an open force organization in GitHub, so open-force, and we'll be putting a whole bunch of stuff underneath that.
Okay, cool. And kind of looking back at what you guys have actually built, what would you make what would you change? Or are you continuously changing and evolving?
Yeah, we're changing this all the time. I was making changes even just to these build scripts last week for various reasons. So we're changing a lot. One of the things that's killing us right now is how long it takes to do stuff. When you say, okay, you have to go through a half-hour process on your machine once a week, it's not a big deal. But right now, if you want to run our continuous integration, if you want to run our checks against our Scratch org, that's another half-hour process. To find out if your code is working or broken is a half hour. That's something we desperately need to fix, and we're working on that actively.
Okay.
But is that just the Salesforce limitation that's taking that long on the Salesforce servers?
Yeah, most of that time is the DX push command, which is really just running a metadata deploy. And so it's just how long it takes for that metadata deploy to run.
Have you looked into kind of switching from DX into the old metadata format and kind of pushing through that?
Yeah, it's the same time. Because on the Salesforce server, what actually is getting sent to the org is the exact same.
Okay, cool.
I noticed you said you've got a package XML. Does that mean you're not using the new source format?
We are. This was just what we did for ripping everything out of production.
Right. And, sorry. I can keep asking questions. You go.
I have two questions. Hello. So from the time you talk to your admin that like sandboxes and change sets to like where you feel like you were in that half an hour like pretty good weekly cadence space, like how long of a period of how many brains did that take to achieve for you?
With the exception of the one developer that we told to disappear and never come back until he had it finished, when we actually had everything in our source code and we had gone through kind of our learning exercise, what does this mean, how does this work, it was still probably about a month to get things moved over. I will say we've got one admin that occasionally goes and does things in production, and then he comes over to my desk and says, hey, I did this, and you've undone that. I'm like, yeah, I did. That's how this
I
works.
would never do that, ever.
Yeah, so we're still learning. We don't have any hard, fast rules about don't touch production. And there are still some things that live there, and our admins are okay with that, like our page layouts or list views and stuff like that. But we frequently find that if we go outside of our process, changes get undone, and that's been a big motivator. But it was, once we had everything ready, maybe a month or so of, oh, did you remember you could do that in Scratch orgs? Did you remember that this is our workflow? Did you remember that if you want to get that change in, it has to go through the proper channels, or I'm going to rip it back out of the org?
Okay. How does this all tie into integrations? I don't know if you, I have a challenge right now with different sandboxes, right? I'm trying to test to a sandbox of that other system, but then I want to promote, and then I don't have enough levels in all the same places. So do you, just like with the managed package question, I guess, do you have those? And can Scratch orgs connect to things in the same way that production can?
Yeah, I mean, we don't get a lot of our integrations set up, and we just cover that mostly with our seed data and say, okay, here's the stuff that comes in, but we're not doing a lot of inter-system connection testing with this. We do have some dedicated sandboxers for that. Like we've dedicated our partial sandbox to a lot of our data integration testing and building.
So by the time you build the thing, by the time it gets there, then that's when you're actually testing that the data is going back and forth.
Yeah, and Scratch org can do it, but if it takes you a long time to get set up and this thing's only going to live for 7 or at most 30 days, it may not be a good fit for that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for all the questions.
I think the lady behind you was
Yes.
One more.
We'll alternate.
All right, 2 questions. One is, are your production builds full builds, or are you just building what's been recently committed?
Yeah, right now we're actually pushing everything with every deploy. There's a certain amount of safety in, I don't care what already is there, just make it all look like this. We are getting to the size now that that's becoming a problem, both in runtime and in, well, really just mostly runtime, but eventually we'll cross over that 10,000 item limit and we'll physically be unable to push everything.
So how will you decide what to push in with each deployment then?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what we're working on right now, and we're about 70% through, is actually taking everything out of the org, comparing the source we want to ship versus the source that's in the org, and then reapplying everything that's already there. I know there are a lot of different strategies. It's, well, compare these two Git commits and ship what changed. We really want a lot more assurance of what's already in the org we are absolutely sure of versus what we want to apply. And then we'll just take everything that's different and send it, and then we'll also delete anything that no longer exists.
And also, could you give us like a quick walkthrough of the end user flow for like an admin making a declarative change, getting it into Git, getting their pull request approved and into production? Like, I think we have a lot of concerns about like users actually doing that. So it'd be great to see what it looks like as an end user.
Yeah, I can do that real quick. Well, we'll see how real quick it is. All right, so if I'm in my org, and I was going to show you some of the things that our automated robot did earlier when it was running Chrome for us, like this checkbox. Oh, look, that's checked now. We'll just skip over that. So if I want to, let's say I'm adding a new field. I'm going to come into our banner object. I'm going to say, oh yeah, I definitely need a new field here. And I'm hoping this runs well. This org's gone through some interesting lifecycle events in the last day getting ready for this talk. And we're just going to add a date. It's our Trailhead X day. It is definitely required. Actually, I don't know what's in that data, so I don't know that I can actually set that value right now. I'm going to go ahead and put it on the page layout. I'm going to save it. So I've gone through normal Salesforce stuff we do often enough, and I'm going to hope this doesn't embarrass me. So I'm inside VS Code. VS Code has a nice way of running all your DX commands, and I can just come in here and say poll, and I'm going to tell it to override conflicts in hopes that it actually works better. That'll take a couple minutes. Well, we'll see. Might take a full minute. And Salesforce in the Scratch orgs has its systems about tracking what metadata you've changed. And so it does this by saying, oh, this thing at this revision date, and it has a whole object system for knowing what things you've changed. This works most of the time.
So you expect your admin to come into DX and do this?
Yeah.
As soon as they've done their changes?
Yep. And our admins actually like it, they've told me, and I didn't have to bribe them. They feel better, they know what they've changed, but also they don't have to remember everything. If they're working on a big project, they go through and make all the items, make all the custom objects, make all the workflow rules, all the approval processes, and then they just come in here and say pull. And it says, oh, yep, here's everything you did back into your source.
Do they do that daily or hourly or just whenever they finish working on something?
It depends. Usually when they're finished working on it, they have it ready. So if we come in here, we can see everything that's changed. And some of these I've changed because I've been monkeying with stuff, but let's come and look at our banner page layout. And we say, oh, so this is where Git starts coming in. What you're seeing is actually Git, the source tracking, giving deltas of these two files. And it says, oh, here's everything you changed in this whole file was you stuck this thing on the page layout. At the same time, you've also added this field, and the field configuration looks like this. I could then commit this into source code, push it up to the server, and then go through a merge request. I'm not going to do that because I have no idea what's in there, and I have no idea if there's any sensitive data poking around. But that's a normal, then you just get into a normal development Git workflow. Once you've pulled all those that metadata down and you're able to see these changes, I can come in here and say, yep, I want to add this, and I want to add this. So these changes are staged, and this is, again, Git topic, and this is why Git was hard for a lot of people was, well, DX already knows what the changes are. How is Git going to deal with this? And separating those concepts, making sure they really understand the roles of both products and both the tools. And then I can say, added banner field, because I was told to do so. I'm grateful you told me to. I'm not resentful at all. And then I would come in here and check the box, and that would commit it locally, and then I would have to say, and then send it to the server, and then I've got that whole life cycle. Does that answer your question well enough? Okay.
Let's go.
Our admins
Next
do go
question.
through that. It's not a killer, but we did spend a lot of time training and a lot of time helping them understand what Git is, how it works, what this GitLab server in the sky does, and all that kind of stuff.
So I've got a question about item potency. So the scripts that you guys run, like when you create a new scratch org, it's like sending all these things to Salesforce. Is that a script that you could then turn? I mean the whole thing, like that loads the in custom settings, seed data, right after the metadata, all that. Could you reapply that same script? Let's say that when your coworkers made some change to seed data or some metadata, and you pull that change in via Git. Can you just apply that to your existing scratch org, or has it have to be basically a vanilla brand new scratch org at that point?
Yeah, we're not really set up to. So if you reconfigure what our seed data looks like, that's a burn the old scratch org and make a new one.
Okay.
We don't really have a good way of deltaing any of that, and the cost of making a new scratch org versus writing the rest of that was just not worth it.
What about like the metadata parts of it? Would that be?
Yeah, so if you have custom metadata or normal metadata or Apex metadata, and you pull that down from source control and you say, okay, so-and-so just committed this in, it's now in master, I want to bring master into my branch because I need that to finish my work. Yep. You do all the source control stuff, all the Git stuff of pulling that in, and then you just run DX's push command and it just says, okay, update the org and you're good to go.
Okay. And what about when you guys are pushing to production? Is that a comprehensive atomic push, or are you having to split that up into multiple deployments basically?
Yeah, for right now, while we're still under the 10,000 limit, then it's a push everything. Okay. And we are heading to a place where we have to start pushing changes only, but at least comparing what's actually in the org and only grabbing the really truly changed stuff.
Yeah. And let's say just hypothetically you guys had to switch. You got a new production org, maybe for whatever reason. Could you take what you have now and do a single atomic comprehensive commit or deployment, or would that have to be broken up?
There would be a couple things we have to do in advance. I talked about there are a few things that we can't push with our source control, and we've got a whole forced ignore deploy that comes into play that's like, don't push these settings and don't destroy my site config and all that stuff I talked about earlier. I would have to go manually set that stuff up, like push my communities in, my sites in, and then come in and reconfigure those. So that once I get the baseline in, all the stuff that I don't deploy with source, then the rest of it could be applied to that org. But it would be a few hours.
Okay. And what about renames? Like, do you need to rename a field, or you're doing some code refactoring, renaming classes, things like that? What, you guys have a policy on that? Because I know it can be problematic. Maybe just talk about what your policy is and how you guys deal with that.
Yeah, so renaming a field is an interesting one because in Salesforce, I can't rename a field over the metadata API. I can add a new field with a different name, and I could even delete the old field with the old name, but Salesforce doesn't, there's no way to tell Salesforce this is really that. And that's where we have to have the admins, before the deploy, go in and manually change, okay, rename this field to this, because then Salesforce will take all the data with it. Yeah.
That's the asterisk.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. What about like Apex classes, things like that?
That's where we're wrapping that up now, and that's where we're actually going to say, okay, this Apex class is no longer in source, put it on the to delete, and this Apex class is in source, put it on the to add.
Okay. Oh, thanks.
In the back, the question in the back.
While you were speaking, you were talking about the issues that you had deploying communities, and just a moment ago you were talking about importing sites as a pre-deployment step. Can you talk a little bit about the strategy that you finalized for getting communities set up in Scratch orgs?
Yeah, there is a big gotcha, well, not a gotcha, but a pain point with communities that is starting to be solved come summer, and that is that the community definition file is binary file format. And Salesforce hasn't given us any tools to dive into that. It gets really interesting when I have changed the community definition via, say, the Lightning page builders and all that building interface on it, this component here with these attributes, and I pull that down, and someone else does the same thing. We just have to pick a winner. Or we have to say, oh, I lost my changes because it's in that compacted binary file format. So we're pretty careful with that. That is still deployable. You can still push that to the org, but it is a place that we end up with a lot of commits or a lot of conflicts of, oh, I added this to the header tag and I added this component to this other page, and we have no way of reconciling both of those. So it's okay, I'm going to accept yours in, and then I'm going to go and redo my change. So we have to be pretty careful with that. The other thing with communities is when you push that new binary blob, Salesforce doesn't automatically expose that to the public. You have to go press the publish button, and that is, again, something I think is being fixed in summer 19. There's a new, yeah. Okay, I'm getting a thumbs up from Shane. Yeah, that's in the
experience
release
bundle.
notes. There's a DX command to publish communities, and I am. There you go. Yeah. Yeah, so I am incredibly excited about that. So part of our deploy, we can say, and give them the new stuff.
Thank you.
Sorry, just a quick one. How do you actually manage releases? So you talked about you use the master branch as the development edge, but if let's assume you actually have like changes that require more than 30 days of development cycle or like are fairly complex, how do you actually manage that with your tool as well as with your branching strategy?
Yeah, so every time you're working on a feature, every time you're making a change, you're splitting off of master branch and you're making a feature branch. And you're going to work on that feature branch until you feel like it's ready to come back into master. We really try and keep our features small enough that you should be able to get through a couple of those a week. But if you're working on something bigger or something longer, and I have a couple of these kind of long-standing, I'll work on them when I get to it, the code can live a lot longer. One of the big mindset changes in moving to Scratch orgs is the idea that the org is not truth. There is nothing about the org that is truth. There's nothing in the org that should only live in the org. And it is especially true for Scratch orgs, but we try and keep that mostly true for our production as well. And that is, okay, if I'm making a bunch of changes, if I'm doing a bunch of configuration stuff, at any point, I ought to be able to DX source pull all the changes down and get those onto my computer. I don't have to send them off. I don't have to do anything else with them. I can commit them locally so I don't lose them and I've got backup copies. But nothing should only live in the org for any extended period of time. And so if that Scratch org runs out of its 30 days, or maybe you, for some reason, only spun it up for 3 days, you just spin up a new one, and it gets all of your work in progress because your computer was the truth for that work in progress, not the org. Does that answer that?
Yeah, thank you.
Cool, thanks. Question in the front?
Okay. I have two questions. I want to know your strategy to handle when you're over the limit. We're far over that limit already, that 500 megabyte zip file limit. What's your strategy to deal with that?
Your metadata is over that limit, or your data storage?
Metadata.
Okay, so you're over the, yeah. Okay, so you're over the number of megabytes that you can ship in a metadata package to Salesforce.
Yes.
This is where we're looking at, in anticipation of this, trying to only deal with the things that are different. In source push, I don't know if how DX deals with this. Does anyone have any experience with that? Does DX automatically chop it up? No? I think their answer is do unlock packages and don't have anything that big. That's a...
Kind of does, actually.
What's that?
The beta command is very nice. It seems to split up with the beta. So
Yeah. Yeah, when we hit that for our production deploy, it's going to be figuring out what's actually different from the source I want, how I want the org to look and how it looks today. We're going to figure out what the delta is and only push that. For Scratch orgs, we haven't hit that point, so I don't know. But it sounds like there's some stuff in the beta command for fixing some of that.
The other one, the other gentleman asked you about like a destruction change. Can you show a little bit on how do you deal with like if I drop the field or those kind of stuff, rename a field?
Yeah, so we're in the process of adding that to our system right now, and that's where we're actually comparing again. We're going back to that. At the beginning of our CI job, we're exporting everything that's in the org today. And then we're saying, okay, based on what I have in source control and what is coming in through the pipeline and what's already there, things that are missing, things that are gone, we're going to build that destructive changes automatically from that list. We're not doing it today. We're probably in the next 2 to 3 weeks, we'll have that running.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks. Question in the back?
Mm-hmm. So I noticed that in your scripts directory that you had some Apex classes that are being ran, but also you're running anonymous Apex while setting up your entire Scratch org. Is there a reason why you have both working simultaneously?
Yeah, so we don't have any Apex classes that live in this scripts directory. It's all either anonymous Apex or JavaScript or a couple different things. So let's look at this browser script. So this browser script is do something on my computer, and that's really where we delineate between, am I running it in JavaScript or am I running it in Apex? And all the JavaScript stuff is run on my computer, and it might go out and hit Salesforce APIs, or in the case of this browser setup, it stands up Chrome and puppets Chrome around to go and push buttons, but that's still happening on my computer. Any of the anonymous Apex is stuff that has to happen inside of Salesforce. And there are a couple reasons for that. Sometimes it's just too difficult or too annoying to do it over Salesforce's APIs, and it's a whole lot faster and easier to just do it in Anonymous Apex. I talked about our knowledge setup. I push a whole bunch of knowledge articles in, and then I go and grab a certain slice of those, and I delete them out of the database, and then I run the APIs from inside of Anonymous Apex to create a new translation, populate the translation, and publish those. I can do all of that over the API, but it's a whole lot of API calls, and it's a lot slower than just run Anonymous Apex. And I'm better at writing Apex than I am JavaScript, so that helps.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks.
First off, thanks for this great talk. We're fighting some of the same battles, and I think you guys are a lot further along, so I appreciate you going over this. One thing I wanted to clarify was I recently worked on a project where we were doing a lot of Service Cloud stuff, and I kept running into a lot of metadata that is not tracked by the metadata API. Like you were saying, omnichannel was one thing I ran into, and I just want to clarify. So if you were doing a project or you're changing something with the omnichannel settings, that's where your Puppeteer scripts come into play, and that's where you'd be setting up things like that that's not able to be tracked in Git. You'd launch a headless browser to set all of that up, or?
Yeah, if you end up with a lot of those, you may want to find something that can actually read and interpret some kind of configuration or XML for those, because we only have 2 things that we're setting with the browser. It was a lot faster to just script out exactly, go find this iframe, find this field in the iframe, put this value inside of it. Because we're only doing that for 2 things, it's a lot easier. If you're doing that for a lot of stuff, you may want to come up with a repeatable pattern, a better structured JavaScript that reads in a bunch of configuration, JSON or YAML or something that says, go here, put this in this field, press this button. Go here, put this in this field, check that box, set this pick list, press that button. So.
And then thank you. And then I had one follow-on question related to admin changes. So it sounds like the admins you're working with are really well versed with DX, and that's great. What we're doing right now is we have them make changes, and we ask them to just create a change set, and then I'm able to pull down that metadata to track what they change. It's not perfect because it basically ends up getting back to the same scenario where what if they forgot to put it in the change set, right? And I was just wondering, once upon a time, did you follow that model too? And if so, like, how hard was it to transfer over to what you do now?
Yeah, we do that rarely. Once in a while, especially our admin that does a lot of data work, will work inside of our dedicated partial sandbox, because that's the only thing with enough data volume to do some of our integration testing and things that he needs to do. And he'll end up with a lot of changes that only exist there. Rather than a change set, what we actually worked with them to do is use the newer, maybe still officially beta, source retrieve and source deploy commands that are really, really fantastic for that. And they can just say, and our admins love it. They love it more than I do. And they can just say, go grab me this custom object or this field or this Apex class or whatever it is that they've had to change, whatever it is that we worked with, and it pulls it right down into the normal DX formatted source code. So that command was a real game changer for our admins.
There's still a lot of work in that process to have to remember exactly what you've changed.
Yeah.
Whereas with Scratch orgs, it's handled by the Scratch org.
Yep.
Whereas that's really hard still.
Yeah, so Scratch orgs are generally easier for everybody, but if they're in an environment or for some reason they couldn't work inside of a Scratch org, which is, there's still reasons, we haven't chopped them off completely, we're still getting our sandbox money out of this. They still have an avenue of how to get that in source control without a lot of work. But it is still remembering, I made this change, I added this workflow rule, I changed this formula definition.
Then remembering all of the dependent stuff, which you changed it at least, will show you the dependencies. But by doing all that manually into DX, you have to remember those dependencies yourself. So you really have to know your metadata. So that's really hard for admins to do.
Yeah, and for a lot of that stuff, I mean, a couple times a week, one of our development team will end up at some admin's desk saying, okay, help me remember what you did, okay, that means we need these things. And that's fine. We're obviously not chastising anyone or getting mad at them. We really love that they're embracing this tool and they want to do it this way, and we're happy to sit down and help them.
So we have a lot of great questions, a lot beyond the asterisk. So we're going to go ahead and be a little snappier just to make sure that we get through everybody's questions.
Shane, did you want to add on to the shimming API stuff at all? Comment on that question? The shimming of APIs. All right. Well, this is a follow-up to the question about What do you do with things that are not covered by the metadata API?
Yeah, so
Just stand mic up here.
Yeah, why don't you grab a panelist mic?
Here, try now.
what's that?
Try that one now.
Try it now? Okay, excellent. Yeah, I'm doing a talk here tomorrow at 9 a.m. If you want to talk, this is one of the little topics. But yeah, there's sort of like 4 circles of things. So, hey, there's an SFDX command for this. That's fantastic. I've done a lot of stuff like you've done where I'm running remote Apex because sometimes that's the easiest way to do it. There's another one where, hey, this is in the Salesforce REST API. So I've written a ton of SFDX plugins. So Shane SFDX plugins are on GitHub, and you can use those. And then kind of the browser driving like you're doing is like the lowest level of this.
Yeah.
And so as we're going through this, it's just sort of like, how deep do I have to go? And then like we were talking about with this community publish thing, if you want to publish a community, that is now moving from having to browser drive it to now having a REST API for that. And then hopefully they kind of start to migrate up the stack so that there's less and less of those browser things. And the other thing you'll see is a whole bunch of metadata API completion. So in the summer release, go through your org settings, org preference settings in the config file. There's a whole bunch of Omni stuff and some other things you may find more useful. So we're trying to fix it.
So Shane, how far do you believe we are from the asterisks?
I think we have some internal goals around metadata API completion. Some of the weird tools where you really have to go, like if it's newer stuff, it's kind of happening automatically. What you're going to find with Salesforce is we have some teams that released something 3 years ago and aren't currently developing anything on it. We have to find someone to go back and add some metadata API stuff to that, or like they have weird little tracking records. New stuff will be good by default. It's the older stuff that someone has to have a reason to go back and touch to prioritize.
True to the core.
Beyond that, yeah. True to the core, you think of admin functions. This is almost like true to the platform metadata API core.
All right, thanks, Shane. Now for my actual question, sorry. Let's be real for a second here. So I watched you create a custom field and immediately check off view all for every profile, which is what every developer ever does. View all for everybody, everywhere, every layout. I don't want to deal with it. So that's the first problem. The second problem is then you do like a git pull, and you've got loads of files, right? And especially for an admin, you're looking at a git diff and you've got 12 files, you've added one thing, and you're thinking, what the heck? So in the real world, like how do you handle those two scenarios? One where people just don't follow the right patterns, or you don't necessarily want them to follow those patterns because it's not their job to like tune the permission sets or something. And then how do you handle just people being overwhelmed? Are your reviews just really messy? Is it just hard to like constantly clean up and review? Like how do you handle that whole sticky wicket?
Yeah, so I think I unchecked view all because I had to check it and then uncheck it.
I noticed that.
Before anyone thinks I'm handing out security for free. No, never for free. Yeah, so we actually do a lot of stuff profiles are actually really messy in DX, and I won't go into it, but we use profiles for the bare minimum, and we do a lot of permission sets, so we can layer stuff in. And permission sets are for this role, we'll grant you a little bit of security. As far as how messy this is and what our code review process looks like, we've been doing this long enough. Again, we started this project about a year ago, and it really came live maybe 9 months, 6 months ago, where we've really everybody's all in. We've had a couple messy code reviews. I'll tell you, the messiest one is when someone adds a new formatter or is the first person to touch a file that hasn't gone through our code formatting, and everything is green and red, and it's really hard to figure out what's actually changed. Our admins are really good about this is what I need, and because Git tracks, their default behavior is we'll just push everything in, and we'll say, oh, we don't need that, or you've granted this, did you mean to? And we'll have some nice conversations about it, but at this point, several months in, we may have those once or twice a week where it's, oh, did you realize the implications of this? Or I think you brought in some stuff you didn't mean to, or you built this feature, but I also have this little bit of testing you were doing because someone walked up to your desk and asked you to do something. And you did that in this scratch org that was dedicated for this purpose. But it's really not very messy. I don't think it's very turbulent to go through code reviews. And our admin side is probably easier than our dev side at this point, just because they have a pretty solid understanding of, well, I added a custom field. That means I should see a custom field. And, oh, yeah, the page layout makes sense. Or I've also put that in the permission set, so I would expect to see that. I think at this point, I think they're pretty good at it. I went and interviewed our admins before I came out to this, and okay, how do you guys really feel? I need you to tell me the truth for once, and not just what I want to hear. And both of our full-time admins were like, we fought it originally. We were really worried, but this has actually been a lot better. And we talk a lot about safety. We talk a lot about change management and change control. And I think they really appreciate that. They really appreciate I like that you've caught what could have been a problem long before it was a problem. And so that's been a real benefit and has gone really smoothly for us. All right, now we'll actually keep our commitment to short answers. I'm sorry.
So I do have 2 questions, and I do admit that I come from the TFS and Ant world, so that's pretty much what we're using in our org, being source control. But I'm just kind of curious, like how you may handle some of the same things that we did using what you're working on. The first one mainly in regards to, since you're spinning up a scratch org each time, do you even check in anything that may involve a hard-coded ID, such as like a flow where there may be a reference to a QID in there, and how you would handle that with your repository in terms of deploying it to a next environment?
There's a couple parts of that. One of them is a lot of us may have users referenced in a lot of our custom metadata. A workflow rule that automatically sets an owner, any of that to a specific user, all of that had to go. We couldn't hold user IDs. We can hold QIDs. QIDs we do track. We know what our queues are in source. Most of the time we can put a queue name in there and not a QID, but sometimes there's process builders that are pointing at stuff. And we just try and figure out what the answer is for that. Usually we just come up with some other way of dealing with it. We do have a couple process builders that we've had to write some bypasses for our scratch orgs. Specifically where it references an ID value on a user for a contact, that contact doesn't exist. We have that same problem in our sandboxes as well.
Okay. And just a second one real quick too. I think you were kind of getting at it with one of your questions earlier, but I'm just curious how you handle on your end on the Git side, feature or release branches, especially if one goes for like a long period of time, like it's a 2-month project you're working on, how you bring everything back together.
Having been bitten by that in the past, the answer is basically we don't.
Okay.
So we'll use feature flags in the application and actually keep things turned off or try and take it forward in a steady way. But it is less pain for us trying to just move things forward slowly or move things forward together than to try and let this thing go off on its own and then come back in a couple months.
Okay.
It's just been a big pain, so we don't do it anymore.
We're going to have to make the last 2 questions really quick. Okay. Not yet? Okay, cool. Oh, perfect.
Sounds like this was obviously a fairly lengthy process from when you started this adventure to where you guys are at now. Can you talk a little bit about, presumably during this time while you're working on this, you're not working on other features and functionalities for your end users. So can you talk a little bit about just how you got buy-in from leadership to work on this instead of those end user features?
Yeah, I mean, some of it was we were careful who we told. So to some people, it looked like we just weren't getting anything done for a little bit. But no, we talked about our direct management chain, the people we needed to talk to, and we said, look, it's really important that we have this stuff. My manager comes from a software development background, both outside of Salesforce and on Salesforce. And so when we started talking about testing and control and using source code, he was all for it and really endorsed us. And we couldn't have done it without that. We couldn't have done it without being able to explain the value of this, being able to tell people, all right, we're making all these changes and it's going to take us a little bit of time. And I know we just hired a resource, but you can't have them for a little while. But it was having some people above me that understood writing code and understood software and understood the value of these things really helped.
For the data import, did you have any objects that were just not easily importable? Like for me, user account default team, I just can't, and I have to use SOAP API.
For which one?
User account default team, something like that. It's the X user supporting Y user.
Yeah, I don't have any of those. The one that I really struggled with is knowledge. Being able to bring in knowledge, bring in data categories, make everything look right and line right. Because it's a multi-step process, there's just not a clean way to do it all together. We don't have a whole lot of the other really crazy ones, so that helps. Yeah.
Cool. So, Anthony, I think you've done a fantastic job. Thank you, everyone, for all of your questions. I had a list of things that I wanted to ask, but you pretty much covered everything that I had on my list. I think it's really fantastic the way you considered your admins, your process for change management, how you picked carefully the people you were getting buy-in from. I think that's really key when you're going through such an undertaking. So we've got a few more minutes. So, Sebastian?
Okay. This is a lot of work. So where do you think someone who actually just is getting into Salesforce DX should actually focus on to get the most value out of it in the beginning? And where do you actually see like a steep learning curve to actually achieve some of the benefits that you guys have achieved?
Yeah, one of the, we'll say, difficult or frustrating parts of this is you can't really dip a toe into parts of it. You can't spin up a Scratch org and put all your code into it. Because I've seen a lot of companies that they're just tracking their code. They're tracking all their Apex, they're tracking all their Lightning components, but they're not tracking everything that makes up their org. They're like, well, my developers work here, my admins work here, and it just meets in production, and I hope it's okay. You can't really start doing Scratch orgs without all your object definitions, without all your fields. It's really difficult. With that, I would think that the very first step is make sure that everything is under source control. Don't necessarily spin up Scratch orgs, don't necessarily make all your changes there, but just start tracking things in source control. Even if it's as simple as a little script that just dumps all of your metadata, please convert it over to the DX format, you'll be happier. There's some DX commands for that. And just store that in Git. You don't have to deploy out of it, you don't have to make changes off of it, but even if that's just a rolling track of here's the changes we've made, here's what the org looked like on this day, that's a really great first step, and it gets you used to pulling everything down, seeing what it looks like. Then you can take that code and, well, let me just try and spin up a Scratch org. Doesn't work yet? It's missing something? Okay, over the next week, I'll bring in that one extra piece. And now you can start doing it piecemeal. You can start grabbing a little bit more, maybe start building some scripts, and then you can go slowly. But just getting everything in source control is an absolute first step.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's a wrap. Thank you so much, Anthony. Thank you to my wonderful panelists.